Alright guys, I'm back with another video. This will be the second to last installation of the position breakdown video, or videos, that little series that we're doing, kind of looking at what each position is going to look like for the Lions in 2020. So there are before we get into it, I know that there are two different, several types of linebackers. There's obviously edge rushers and off-ball linebackers, and the linebackers do different things, and you can't necessarily all classify them as, the same position, because they obviously are not. They obviously do different things. But for the purposes of this video, if you go back to the team they played on last year, if you go to that roster, whatever they are listed at, if they are listed as a linebacker, they will be on this video. But obviously, I will explain what they do and what they are good at, what they're bad at, what their role is, whether they are edge rushers or off-ball linebackers. So I do know that there's a difference, but I didn't want to make more videos on this than was really necessary. So it's just letting everybody know before the video actually begins. If you do enjoy the content, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, share it with a Lions fan. And with that being said, let's get into the linebackers. So currently there are 10 linebackers on the Detroit Lions roster right now. And those 10 are Christian Jones, Jared Davis, Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Jason Kabinda, Jelani Tavai, Anthony Pittman, Jamie Collins, Elijah Lee, Reggie Ragland, and Julian Okwara. So as we do with all the other ones, or most of the other ones, we're going to work our way from the bottom of the depth chart up to the top. Obviously start with some of the lower guys, the practice squad guys, and work our way up to the starters and who will have the biggest impact on the Detroit Lions in 2020. So with that being said, the first player that we'll be talking about is Anthony Pittman. Anthony Pittman he played in the preseason last year for the Lions, was cut from the roster, or was cut and then eventually signed back to the practice squad, and then late in the season he was signed to the active roster when injuries started piling up. He's going into his second season next year. He played in one game, had one tackle, so obviously didn't have a huge impact. Was on the practice squad for most of the year and only came in for extreme measures last season. Wouldn't expect a lot out of him. I would actually be surprised if he makes the active, or if he even makes the practice squad next season. I would assume that he would be cut. But obviously, if injuries pile up again, you can always sign him to the practice squad, because I wouldn't expect too many people to be interested in Anthony Pittman. So the next player we're talking about is Jason Kabinda. If that name sounds familiar, it's because you watched Hard Knocks last year. He was a featured player on that TV show. I love that TV show. I don't know if they're doing it this year because of obviously problems. No, they might not even have an off season this year, so it would be tough to film Hard Knocks if there was no off season. But I hope they film it, just as a side note. But he was obviously a featured player, as I said. They kind of went into his backstory and, some interesting things about him. He was a leader for the Raiders. It seemed like he had, very good qualities for a linebacker. He seemed to be a very smart player. And unfortunately, he was cut by the Raiders, but that gave him the opportunity to be picked up by the Detroit Lions after the preseason. So that is a good thing for him. I really like him as a person, and I think that he's a very good football player. He's going to compete next preseason, or this coming preseason, for a roster spot, but I would assume that he will be put on the practice squad and brought up just like Anthony Pittman was last season. So I wouldn't expect a ton out of him. He played in 4 games last season, had 2 tackles, so obviously didn't have a huge impact for the Lions, but I really like him just because I kind of have his backstory, and I know a little bit about him because of Hard Knocks. So the next player we'll be talking about is Elijah Lee, free agent signing from the 49ers. Last season, Lee played in 8 games, had 7 tackles. Again, not really anything crazy. A role player, I guess you could say, for the 49ers. Probably will compete in the preseason for a spot, but I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up actually cutting him, or he just is a depth player buried on the depth chart for the roster in case of extreme measures. Again, if we get hit by injuries as hard as we did last year, I wouldn't expect that to happen, but obviously it's the NFL. It's a very punishing game, very punishing sport, and you never know who's going to go down with an injury at any given time. So I would expect him to compete, push guys to be better, and if anything, he will end up at the bottom of the depth chart, unless he can obviously have a huge preseason and training camp. So the next guy I'll talk about is Jalen Reeves-Maybin. He's been on the Lions for a couple of years now. Pretty good coverage linebacker, I think, for the Detroit Lions. Not the biggest guy, kind of smaller. But he did play in 16 games last year. He had 37 tackles. He had 1 forced fumble and 1 fumble recovery. Obviously, so forcing a turnover, good for him. He's more of a backup, third string middle linebacker. Well, at least he was last year. He might even drop a little bit more with Jamie Collins coming in, but obviously a role player for the Detroit Lions. He had a pretty good preseason last year. I think he had an interception on Josh Allen that got called back because of some defensive penalty that was stupid on part of the Detroit Lions. But obviously he's been here for a while. He knows the system. He knows what we're doing. I really like him when he comes in. I think that he is a pretty good defensive player. But obviously he's not necessarily athletic enough, gifted enough to keep up with some of the better linebackers on the team. And he probably will not start next season, but I wouldn't be surprised if he came in and had a specific role that they wanted him to play. So the next player is Reggie Ragland. Again, free agent signing. I think we got him on like a $1 million deal, something very cheap, very, not taxing towards the Lions. So it was a good contract, obviously. He played in 14 games with the Chiefs last season. He had 2 sacks and 1 fumble recovery. I actually didn't write down tackles, but I would assume he had a couple. So he was a role player for the Chiefs, got a couple sacks, got a fumble recovery, so he had a turnover with the Chiefs last season. So very good guy. He's a hard hitter. He's a run-stopping linebacker, kind of like Jarrad Davis. Not great in coverage, which kind of is unfortunate because I think we needed a coverage linebacker coming into free agency, obviously, because our linebackers on the roster last year could not cover anything. They probably couldn't cover me if I was out there. So, I mean, it just wasn't a very good situation last season. We actually had 2 guys ranking the bottom 8 for not pass rush, for coverage ability last season. We had 2 linebackers ranking the bottom 8 in the whole league. So we obviously needed pass coverage help, and we did get that, but I will get into that later. That was not Reggie Ragland. Reggie Ragland does not help with pass coverage, but he will be a rotational guy to come in and get some pressure on the quarterback. So the next guy that I'll talk about is Julian Okwara. Obviously, did a deep dive on him yesterday. As you know, he played in 9 games, had 19 tackles, 7 of those for loss, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. Very good player, fell in the draft, 3rd-round pick. He was a 3rd-round pick for us. He fell because of injuries. He broke his fibula, which is unfortunate, but that allowed him to fall to the Lions, and the Lions to have a very good value pick in the 3rd round. I think he's a very good player. He might be the biggest steal in the draft for the Detroit Lions. I would expect him to come in, take over that Devon Kennard role, but he can cover a little better than Kennard did. I went over all this yesterday, but I would expect him to come in day one, have a role to play. He will be in the pass rush, be involved. He will get a couple sacks. He will turn the ball over a couple times, and he will be a very good player for the Detroit Lions. I think this was a great pickup for us, and he can kind of do both. He can rush the passer very well, and he can even cover a little bit, which is something that, again, as I said earlier, the Detroit Lions desperately needed this past offseason. So then we get to Christian Jones, who played outside linebacker for us last year. He started for us. He played in 13 games, had missed a couple because of injury. He had 51 total tackles, 2 sacks, 1 fumble recovery, and 4 passes defended. This was one of the guys that ranked bottom 8 in pass coverage by Pro Football Focus. The other one we will get to next. But obviously, if you rank bottom 8 in pass coverage out of all linebackers, you're not very good at it. And he's not a great player, not a great linebacker. We just haven't had that talent at outside linebacker to really replace him or really challenge him. 2 sacks and a fumble recovery isn't horrible. But obviously, if you're going to have a starting linebacker on the roster, you would want him to be an impact player, want him to make a lot of plays for you. And Christian Jones just really isn't that guy that's going to make a ton of plays for you. So that is unfortunate, but he'll probably start again next season unless Jamie Collins starts on the outside or Jarrad Davis starts on the outside. Personally, I want Jarrad Davis to move to the outside, but I'll go over that in a little bit. I'll go over who I want to start for the Lions and what I want their roster to look like, or at least their linebacking core to look like when they're playing in a 4-3 versus a 3-4. So Christian Jones, not a great player, but he's serviceable. He'll be a rotational guy, come in, keep guys fresh. So next we'll move on to Jarrad Davis. Obviously the first round pick from a couple years ago. The Lions ended up not picking up his 5th-year option this season. This was the other player that ranked bottom 8 in pass coverage. He played in 11 games, had 63 tackles, he had 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and a fumble recovery. So he's actually pretty good in run defense. He's pretty good at jarring the ball loose and getting a turnover for the Lions, or at least giving the Lions a chance to get a turnover. I personally like Jarrad Davis. I think that we're not necessarily using him to the best of his ability. I think if we move him from outside linebacker or inside linebacker, that middle linebacker role, to an outside linebacker, we can rush the passer a little bit more. I think that we'll see a jump in his production because I think that he's much better at rushing the passer than coverage, obviously. So I think if we move him outside, we'll see a big jump in production for him, and he might actually even get a new contract next season. So I think that will be very interesting to watch. He'll be a player that you need to look out for this coming season to see how we use him and how he looks next season. See if he could take that big step forward. Patricia really likes this guy. Jarrad Davis works hard. He said that he's the kind of personality that they want in the program, who they want to lead the Lions into battle every Sunday. And so obviously Patricia likes him. If he can even take a little bit of a step forward, I think Patricia will, if he has a job next season, will find a way to keep Jarrad Davis on the roster. And then getting into the two, bigger linebackers that I think will have a very big impact. Jahlani Tavai, 2nd-round pick last season. When he was picked, a lot of Lions fans were not happy because he wasn't expected to go until a little bit later in the draft. Probably could have gotten him a little later and maybe got Greedy Williams last year, or somebody else that might have fallen in the draft. I can't remember exactly who was there, but I know Greedy Williams was the guy that a lot of Lions fans wanted. But I think that Jahlani Tavai proved last season that he was worth that 2nd-round pick. He had a very good season for not being a full-time starting linebacker. He played in 15 games for the Lions last season. He had 58 total tackles, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, an interception, and 2 passes defended. So I think this is going to be our coverage linebacker, or at least one of them. He showed a lot of really good things in coverage. Obviously, he had an interception, a couple pass breakups. And I think that this guy can be, if he could take a step forward, if he can learn how to not even necessarily cover better, but if he just gets a little bit more of a coverage role, I think that he can be very good at it. And obviously we could send him on the blitz and he'll get a couple of sacks as he did last season. I really like this guy. I wasn't a big fan of him in the draft, but going into next season, he's a guy that I'm definitely gonna have to look out for, and what you guys should look out for, and see if he can take that next step forward to be an elite linebacker next season. And the last linebacker on the list is Jamie Collins, free agent signing from New England. Again, another Patriot. A lot of guys don't like him because obviously he's just a Patriot. Lions fans don't like the Patriot ties, but Jamie Collins was a very good player last year for the New England Patriots. Obviously, when he went to the Browns, his production dropped drastically, and he hasn't really succeeded outside that New England Belichick system. But the Lions play a very similar system to what the New England Patriots play. Obviously, Patricia wants to take after his mentor, his leader, Bill Belichick. So they run very similar defenses. So I see no reason why Jamie Collins should take a step back if he's playing in the same defense, if he's playing that same role. Last year, Jamie Collins had a very good season. He had 81 total tackles. He had 7 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, 3 interceptions, and a touchdown. So he forced a lot of turnovers last year. He ended a lot of drives last year. This is going to be the veteran presence on our defense, the veteran linebacker that'll come in, start day one, obviously put up good production for the Lions, hopefully, and he can also mentor that guy, that Jarrad Davis, that Jahlani Tavai, to be that next generation of Lions linebackers. I think that this is a good pickup now, but I also think that he can help mentor, obviously, Jarrad Davis and Jahlani Tavai to become very good linebackers. Jarrad Davis, when he came in, was the number 1 right away. He never really had that guy to sit and learn behind, but now he does. Jamie Collins can obviously teach him some things that he wouldn't have known. He hasn't had that veteran presence to teach him these kind of things. So if Jarrad Davis is better in pass coverage next season, I think we know where to look. Look at Jamie Collins. He might be the reason. He might save Jarrad Davis's job if he can teach him how to cover a little bit better. But that's the kind of the linebacker group. As you could tell when I was going over the list, I was going over it kind of fast, so I apologize. But Obviously, 10 players, if we spend too much time, the video will be very, very long. And I'm trying to keep it between 10 to 17 minutes, somewhere in there. Linebackers, to start, I want Jarrad Davis on the outside. I want Julian Okwara as the Devon Kennard role. I want Jarrad Davis on the other side rushing the passer. I want Jamie Collins and Jelani Tavai in at the two middle linebackers. So we're playing a 4-3. If we're playing a 3-4 where the linebackers have to cover, I want, obviously, Jamie Collins in the middle linebacker, Jelani Tavai outside, and, maybe Julian Okwara is still there too, so he can rush the passer or cover, and mix it up, make defenses guess, and obviously, if they're guessing, they don't know, they can't plan for it as well. So that's kind of my opinions. I think that this is a very changed linebacker group. I think that we'll have a little bit more leadership, a little bit more experience in that group than we did last season. So hopefully that whole linebacker group will take a step forward with the addition of veteran presence. So I think that this can be a strength for the Lions next season if we put out the right guys. If we put all of our guys in positions to succeed, positions that they're good at, like Jarrad Davis rushing the passer more and covering less. I think that our linebackers take a step forward and actually help our defense be a very, at least serviceable unit next season, and not a liability where, we're going to give up tons of points every single game. But that's, kind of all I got for the linebackers. Let me know what you guys think of the linebacker situation in the comments below, whether it's a strength, a weakness, and why. Who do you want to start at, the linebacker positions? So that's all I got today. If there's Lions news before tomorrow, I will make a video, let you guys know, inform everybody. If not, I'll see you tomorrow for another prospect breakdown, rookie breakdown for the Detroit Lions. But that is all I got for right now. I will see you guys later, and goodbye.